Snow didn't fall that morning, it settled, like regret. The kind that lays itself across a soul long before it ever touches the earth. Irish June McAllister had always been good at being still. Still when her mother told her no man would ever want a woman with her father's chin. Still when the preacher asked her to stop singing so loud, her voice distracting the younger brides. Still when Silas Crawley tied the rope around her wrists and looped it twice around the fence post, just beneath the ridge outside town, and told her not to scream. "You're lucky I didn't leave you in a ditch," he'd muttered, brushing dust from his coat as if he hadn't just condemned a woman in winter. She had not screamed. She was 40, far past the age of being listened to. Her belly, heavy with child, strained against her dress. The wind bit through the worn cotton, and her toes, raw and purpling, curled into the hard-packed snow beneath her. There was no one on the trail that day, save a single crow that watched her from the fence rail, black eyes blinking without sympathy. She could no longer feel her fingertips. Somewhere inside, she told the baby to stay. Not yet. Not in the cold. Not like this. A gust of wind lifted her hair, limp and graying, like smoke from a dying fire. She thought of her sister's wedding, of sitting at the back of the church while younger, thinner girls were passed from father to husband like sacred offerings. Iris had always sat at the edges of life. Until Silas. Until the words he whispered, words that felt like warmth in a world that had grown so cold. "You're still soft inside," he'd said, once, stroking her belly. "But you're too old to carry hope." The next morning, she found herself tied like livestock. She did not cry. Crying, like hoping, was something she'd given up the year she turned 39. The sound of hooves startled her. She flinched, but couldn't move enough to hide. The crow cawed once and flew. A rider approached, slow and sure, as if he'd seen worse than her and wasn't yet convinced this was the end of the world. His coat was worn at the cuffs, stitched with care. He rode a paint mare, her breath fogging the air like pipe smoke. He stopped a few feet away, dismounted, and stood there. She watched him through lashes crusted in frost. "You alive?" he asked. Her lips cracked when she nodded. The sound it made felt like paper tearing. He said nothing more. Didn't offer a speech, nor question. Just pulled a knife from his belt and cut the rope at her wrists. His hands were gloved, careful. When she sagged, he caught her, slowly, like he was used to holding things that might break. She didn't resist when he lifted her. Her body was past fighting. The warmth of him hit her like sunlight through stained glass. Not enough to save, but enough to remember what it felt like. He laid her across the mare, gentle as a prayer, then swung up behind her. She opened her mouth once, not sure what she'd say. "Thank you, why, I'm sorry." But all that came out was a whisper. "Who are you?" "Boaz," he said. He spoke like a man who hadn't said his own name in a long time. They rode without words. The prairie rolled white and endless. Her head lolled against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat beneath layers of wool and silence. It was steady. She did not know where he was taking her, and she didn't ask. Somewhere behind them, the crow returned to the fence post, picking at the frayed end of the rope she'd left behind. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had already bruised the sky. He carried her through the door without effort, like she weighed no more than a memory. Laid her on a narrow bed tucked beneath a window. The quilt smelled of cedar in thyme. His hands brushed the hair from her face. "I'll make a fire," he said, as if her being there was no surprise at all. The room was small, wood walls, a stone hearth, a cradle pushed into the corner, long unused. She blinked at it. A single dusty toy horse sat inside, carved from cherrywood. He brought her water in a tin cup. "Slow," he warned. She drank like someone relearning how to live. Her fingers, red and swollen, trembled as she tried to hold the cup steady. He steadied it for her. Not with pity, but presence. "You alone out here?" she asked, voice a rasp. He shrugged, then nodded. "Been 3 years. What happened?" "Wife. Baby. Fever in winter." The firewood ran low. She didn't answer. just stared at the way his shoulders stooped, not from weight, but where. That night, he sat by the hearth while she slept. Or pretended to. She heard him hum once, low, almost like a lullaby. But it broke halfway through. The sound turned into silence again. He didn't speak, didn't sigh. Just sat. In the morning, sunlight pressed against the windowpane like a promise. She tried to rise. Her legs gave. Boaz caught her again, like he'd expected it. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. Just took her hand and guided it to a bowl of warm water. "Because I needed saving once. And someone let me stay." She bathed her fingers. The water turned pink. Later, when he stepped out to feed the mare, she found an apron folded on the chair. A dress, too, one clearly once worn by someone who'd smiled often. It smelled of lilac. She pressed it to her face and wept, not for Silas, or shame, or fear, but because for the first time, someone had seen her without asking if she was worth seeing. By noon, she was sitting on the porch wrapped in a quilt, sipping weak coffee from a tin mug. The prairie stretched silent before her. Boaz leaned against the post beside her, not saying much. The wind whistled through the dry branches. She closed her eyes and whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know how to be saved." He didn't answer. He just sat beside her, still, like her. But this time, she wasn't still out of fear. She was still because, for once, she didn't have to move. And somewhere in the silence, a part of her not yet broken began to thaw. The house was too quiet to be empty. It had the hush of a chapel long since abandoned, where candles once burned low and laughter used to echo off the beams. Iris knew that kind of silence, the kind that remembers. It met her at the doorway each time she crossed the threshold, as if the walls themselves paused, watching. She moved slow now. Her steps were careful, and her belly swayed with a weight that pulled at her spine. Her body was no longer hers, not entirely. It belonged to time, to hunger, to the child not yet named. And to this place that offered her warmth without reason. Boaz never spoke much, but he listened without interruption. That alone was more than most men had given her. He'd left early, before the sky broke blue. Just a note folded on the table in a firm, square hand, went for feed. Firewood stacked. Stay warm. No name signed at the bottom. She pressed the paper to her lips before folding it again. His coat still hung on the hook near the door. It smelled of horses and pine. She sat in it sometimes, when he was gone, letting its weight settle across her shoulders like protection. The baby stirred. A slow, circular movement just beneath her ribs. She pressed a palm against her belly and whispered, "Not yet. Let me have today." The child had no father she would name. No place in the town that spat her out. But here, in this hushed, wooden house, she dared think of cradles again. There was one in the corner. Always in the corner. A cradle untouched, its cherry wood dulled with dust. A toy horse rested inside, one ear chipped. She had cleaned it twice now, though Boaz never asked her to. Just couldn't bear to look at it gathering cobwebs like an unspoken prayer. She learned to keep the fire fed. Learned to hang his shirts on the line and not fold them the way a wife would, but careful all the same. She didn't know how to be someone worth keeping, but she knew how to tend things. Chores were safer than conversation. The first time she laughed, a soft, broken chuckle when a hen tried to peck her apron string, Boaz froze. His head tilted like he wasn't sure he'd heard it right. Then he nodded, just once, and kept fixing the gate latch. He never asked about Silas. Never about the child. That mercy was its own form of tenderness. One afternoon, as wind raked the plains outside, Iris found herself in the pantry, running her fingers along the shelf of preserved jars. Peaches. Pickles. Chokecherry jam. Each one sealed by hands that hadn't belonged to her. And yet none of it had been touched. She brought a jar to the table, the chokecherry one, and stared at it a long time. The lid stuck at first, then gave with a sigh. When Boaz returned, the smell of warm bread and tart jam lingered in the air. He looked at her, then the open jar. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She said it before she could talk herself out of it. That night, they ate in quiet. But not silence. He set 2 spoons down instead of 1. Iris had once imagined love like a storm, a feverish kiss in the rain, or a man riding over hills to claim her with wild eyes and wild promises. But here, love came without fireworks. It came in the way he left the rocker beside the fire pulled out, knowing she'd want to sit. It came in the way he didn't touch her stomach without asking. In the way he said, "There's more if you're hungry," even when there wasn't. In the way he said her name only once, but meant it like scripture. They walked sometimes, at dusk. She leaned heavy on his arm as the prairie shifted from gold to violet. He didn't lead. He just kept pace beside her. One evening, the wind carried the faint sound of piano from the distant church in town. A hymn. Faint but clear. Iris paused mid-step. She turned to Boaz. "You ever go back?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" "They buried her there." She nodded. That was all. They kept walking. The snow from earlier weeks had melted into cold mud. A boot caught in it. She nearly stumbled. Boaz steadied her. Iris looked down. Her shoes, cracked leather things, borrowed from a box near the door, were caked in prairie. "I'll ruin your floors," she said. "They're already worn," he said. But he bent anyway, knelt before her, and brushed off the dirt with his hands. Something inside her broke softly, like old ice under sunlight. The next morning, she found a needle and thread and mended the hem of his coat. It was the first thing she'd fixed in years that wasn't herself. They never called what they were doing love. But she saw it in the way he left the lantern lit when he left before dawn. In the way he started making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, even though hers always went cold before she drank it. In the way he let her be. One night, a storm thrashed the windows. The wind screamed like it remembered something the earth had forgotten. Iris couldn't sleep. She walked the dark house, hands on her stomach, whispering lullabies she barely recalled. The cradle creaked once. Just once. Boaz didn't wake. Or pretended not to. But when she returned to her bed, she found a folded quilt waiting at the foot. Her name stitched into one corner. Not new work. Old stitches. A different woman's hand. She ran her fingers over it, then lay back and whispered, "I'll carry this child in quiet, for her and for me." In the morning, the clouds broke. A single beam of light stretched through the kitchen window, touching the table where the jam jar sat open. And for the first time, the house exhaled. It wasn't laughter. Not yet. But it was the sound of 2 silences beginning to lean toward each other. The first time Iris stepped into town again, the air tightened like a noose. Boaz had offered to go alone. Said he could fetch the flour, the thread, and the tobacco without her. But something in her needed to be seen, not for approval, not even for forgiveness. Just seen, like a shadow that won't vanish when the sun comes out. She wore a dress Martha had left by the door, one button mended by Boaz himself. Her hands were clean, but her wrists still bore the faint ghosts of rope. Her belly, now heavy with life that refused to apologize, pressed gently against the fabric. She moved slower than she used to, but more certain. Boaz helped her onto the wagon without a word. They rode in silence except for the rain slapping soft against the mare and the distant shriek of a hawk overhead. As the town rose on the horizon, Iris felt the old dread creep up her spine. Not fear exactly, something older. Shame's cousin. The kind of feeling that doesn't yell but whispers in every windowpane. The town hadn't changed. Same crooked church steeple. Same mud-rutted road. Same faces behind shuttered glances. A few folks paused their sweeping or fence mending as the wagon passed. Some turned back to their work, like if they didn't see her, they wouldn't have to question what kind of man Boaz was for bringing her here. One child pointed. Her mother yanked him by the arm and whispered something sharp. Boaz didn't flinch. Didn't look at anyone but the road ahead. Iris wished she could be that steady. Inside the mercantile, the scent of peppermints and wood polish hit like memory. Mr. Levitt, the shopkeeper, froze when he saw her. "Boaz," he said with a strained smile. "Didn't expect to see you with company." Iris nodded politely. "Just here for muslin and lye." Levitt's eyes flicked to her belly, then back to Boaz. "You sure she ought to be up and about?" Boaz's voice was calm, but iron. "She's standing. That's more than most." Levitt didn't argue. He fetched the items, but the way he placed them on the counter like they might stain told Iris all she needed to know. Names traveled faster than horses out here. And hers wasn't being spoken in kindness. Outside, whispers rode the breeze. Iris heard them without trying. "That's the woman Silas. Left tied like a dog. Too old to be with child. What kind of woman lets herself?" Boaz offered his arm. She didn't take it. Not out of pride. But because she needed to walk those last 20 paces on her own. They passed the blacksmith, who paused mid-hammer. He nodded to Boaz, then to Iris. The nod was small, but not cruel. She held on to that. The church bell rang the hour. Children spilled from the schoolhouse. One girl ran too close and brushed Iris's skirts before her mother snatched her away. "Mind your distance," the woman hissed. "You don't know what's in her blood." Iris didn't stop. Didn't answer. Just kept walking, her shoes loud in the hush. At the wagon, she nearly collapsed from the weight of it all, her body, her breath, their eyes. Boaz helped her up, wordless as ever. They were halfway home before she let the tears slip free. She wiped them fast, ashamed. Boaz didn't look at her. Just said, "They'll keep talking. But that don't mean they know the story." She let out a bitter laugh. "They know enough. That I was left. That I was used. That I'm carrying a child with no father to name." Boaz shook his head. "They know what Silas told them. But I seen the rest. I seen the woman who scrubbed my floor without being asked. Who sewed my coat and didn't say it was thanks. Who sings when she thinks no one's listenin'. That's the story I know." She turned to him, slow. "Why don't you speak up in town?" His jaw clenched. "Ain't there ears I care to fill?" The wagon rocked forward. "But they speak your name," she said. "And mine, like it's a warning." He looked ahead. "Let 'em. When names hit tongues like knives, they only draw blood if you believe 'em." Back at the ranch, Iris sat long on the porch, watching dust swirl in the distance like a ghost trying to find its grave. Martha arrived that evening. Said she'd heard about the trip into town. Brought a loaf of cornbread and a tin of wild honey. "They said you walked right past Mabel Reeve and didn't flinch," she said with a grin. "God, I wish I'd seen that woman's face." Iris chuckled, but it died quick. "I still feel like a ghost." Martha took her hand. "That's what makes you dangerous. They don't know how to kill what's already come back from the edge." Iris didn't speak. But later, when the fire was low and Boaz had gone to bed, she sat beside the cradle and whispered the baby's name for the first time. It wasn't her own. And it wasn't his. It was something entirely new. The sky split without warning. One moment, the world was still a prairie of dry breath and low winds. The next, a rumble rolled through the distance, low and thunderless, the kind of sound that doesn't start in the clouds but in the bones. Boaz had seen storms before, but this one arrived like a reckoning. Iris stood by the doorway, hand on her lower back, eyes narrowed toward the east. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Her face had gone pale beneath the weight of a new silence. The first pain came like a stone dropped in her spine. Not sharp. Just deep. A warning. Boaz noticed her shift her weight and paused by the woodpile. "Is it time?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. Another bolt of pain curled her inward. He dropped the axe and stepped toward her, but she raised a hand. "Don't." Not yet. She still hadn't learned how to ask for help without shame. The storm broke overhead in a sudden scream of wind. Dust lifted in curtains across the plain. The sky went from yellow to slate in minutes. Somewhere far off, a fence cracked and fell. Boaz led the horses into the barn, muttering calm to them. They listened better than most men. Inside the cabin, Iris gripped the back of a chair and tried to breathe. Each inhale felt like a betrayal. The baby was too early. She wasn't ready. The cradle in the corner hadn't even been turned yet, still facing the window like a sentry keeping guard over ghosts. By the time Boaz returned, her dress was soaked through, not with water but with fear. She looked up at him, and this time, she didn't lie. "It's coming." Boaz didn't flinch. "We'll manage." "No," she said. "You don't understand. It's not time. I'm not ready. This baby, it'll kill me." He knelt beside her, hand gentle on her knee. "Then we don't give it a choice. We bring it into the world. Together." She wanted to scream at him. At the sky. At the injustice of being reborn when she hadn't asked to be carried back into life. Instead, she gripped his hand and wept. He laid her on the bed. Pulled blankets from the chest. Stoked the fire. "I need Martha," she gasped. "You have to go now." Boaz looked at the storm outside. Trees bent like penitents. Rain whipped sideways. But he nodded. He found his slicker, saddled the mare, and left without fanfare. The door shut like the closing of a book. Iris breathed in the empty space. The wind howled outside. Inside, she was alone again, sweat curling at her neck, hands clawing the quilt. The pains came quicker now. No rhythm. Just fire. She whispered apologies to the child. "Not like this. I didn't want to start your life with suffering." She dragged herself up once, trying to reach the cradle, as if proximity to hope might ease the ache. She didn't make it. Darkness pressed in. Outside, Boaz rode through wind that slapped the skin raw. He leaned forward, whispering to the horse like it was a child being lulled. "Come on now. We've lost enough." The trip to Martha's should have taken 20 minutes. It took nearly an hour. She opened the door before he knocked. Already dressed, already waiting. "I knew she'd go early," Martha said. "Some storms come before the signs." Together, they rode back, lightning clawing the sky behind them. Inside, Iris had curled sideways, breath thin. She'd stopped counting minutes between contractions. She no longer had a name for the pain, only its presence. When the door opened, she barely noticed. Martha's voice broke through like a hymn. "You waited, didn't you, Iris? You held on." Iris nodded. A single tear. Martha got to work. Boaz hovered by the door, uncertain whether to enter or leave the earth entirely. His hands were useless. His strength meaningless. "Let her hurt with pride," Martha said. "But don't let her feel alone." So Boaz stayed. At Iris's side. Holding her hand through the hours that followed, where time blurred and prayers ran dry. "You can't," Iris panted. "You can't let the child die." "She won't," Boaz whispered. "She's got your breath. And my stubborn." At the final push, Iris screamed. Then silence. Then a sound that didn't belong to pain. A cry. Small. Fierce. A girl. Martha wrapped her in the same quilt Iris had been found in. "She's early," she said, "but strong." Iris reached for her with shaking arms. The baby fit against her chest like a forgotten piece of something she'd once been. "She's beautiful," Iris whispered. Boaz sat at her side, eyes shining in the firelight. "You both are." They named her Hope, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. Later, when the rain calmed and the world went still, Iris dozed with the child tucked close. Boaz stood by the window, watching as the clouds broke open, letting moonlight pour across the fields. The storm had passed. But something deeper had stayed. It was the understanding between two people who had once been buried by grief, by shame, by silence, and now stood, side by side, carrying something new between them. Not just a child, but a reason to keep going. Spring came like an apology. It melted what winter had done, slowly and without spectacle. The drifts outside Boaz's cabin receded, revealing hard-packed earth and stubborn sprouts of green pushing up like second chances. The wind smelled of thawed soil and something gentler than survival. Iris stood barefoot near the fence post where the lilacs had begun to bud. Her child, Hope, slept in the sling against her chest, breath-warm and milk-sweet. Iris's hair, no longer tangled or brittle, brushed against her cheeks in the breeze. She reached down and touched the rotted length of wood still embedded in the dirt. The same kind of post she'd been tied to, months ago, before the wind had changed direction and carried her to this place. Behind her, Boaz approached with his steady walk. One of his sleeves was rolled up, revealing the tan of hard work and sun. He carried a spade. "I think it's time we pull it up," he said. She nodded. Together, they dug until the post came loose with a groan and toppled. It didn't snap. It surrendered. They left the hole open, and in it, Iris dropped the old rope, the one Martha had saved, the one that had once bound her wrists. Boaz laid the lilac root where the post had been, then covered it with earth. His hand lingered over hers as they pressed the soil flat. From behind the hills, the sound of hooves rose. Boaz turned first, the corner of his mouth tightening. Silas Crowley rode with 3 men and a badge of entitlement. He hadn't changed. Still had that smirk, that polished cruelty that only looked charming from a distance. He dismounted like he owned the grass. "Well, look what the Lord dragged in," Silas said, eyes grazing Iris like he had a right to them. "Thought I'd find my woman here." Iris stepped back, instinctively shielding Hope. "I'm not yours," she said, voice quiet but firm. Silas laughed, slow and practiced. "You're carrying my blood." "No," Iris replied. "I'm carrying a child who has never heard your voice, never felt your hand, and never will." The men behind Silas shifted in their saddles. Boaz didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't need to. He stepped between them with a calmness that warned more than steel ever could. Silas's eyes narrowed. "You think you can keep her? A tied-up cast-off carrying another man's shame? What happens when the town turns on you?" "They already tried," Boaz said. "But my house is still standing." Iris didn't look away. "I was tied to a fence like an animal. No one came but him. Not the preacher. Not the law. And sure as hell not you." Silas's charm cracked. His lip curled. "She was left to die," Boaz said, voice low. "And now she's alive. You try to take that from her, and I'll plant you under this fence." The men behind Silas hesitated. One turned his horse slightly. "Leave," Boaz said. Silas's jaw ticked. "This isn't finished." "It is," Iris said, stepping beside Boaz. "You just don't get to write the ending." He stared at her, at the woman he'd once left in the cold, and for the first time, he looked afraid, not of the man beside her, but of the fact that she no longer feared him. Silas mounted and rode off without another word. When the dust settled, Iris exhaled for the first time in hours. Boaz turned to her. "You all right?" "I think I am," she said. For the first time. They walked back to the porch. She laid Hope in the cradle, now facing the room instead of the window. The baby stirred, then fell still again. That evening, the town's women came in 2s and 3s. Martha first, arms crossed and chin high. Then the blacksmith's wife, carrying bread. Then Mrs. Reeve, who once spat at Iris's feet, came silent, no words, just a jar of preserves and eyes lowered. They didn't ask forgiveness. But they came. Iris served coffee. Not as a hostess. As a woman who had outlived their judgment. Boaz said little, as always. But every time he passed Iris, his hand grazed hers like punctuation, a steady reminder that she was no longer alone in the sentence of her life. Later, the fire crackled low, and the porch was quiet again. Iris sat with Hope asleep in her arms. Boaz lit a pipe and leaned against the railing, eyes on the stars. She watched him, then spoke softly. "What do you call something that nearly died but chose not to?" He thought a moment. "Resurrected," he said. "Or just plain stubborn." She smiled. "Then I guess we're both that." He looked at her. Really looked. "I never thought I'd love again," he said. "I never thought I'd be more than tolerated." "You're more than that." "I know." She leaned her head on his shoulder. He rested his chin on her hair. No kiss. No dramatic diaristion. Just stillness. Just presence. Just two people who had come through fire, and frost, and gossip, and blood, and still chose to plant lilacs. The stars blinked above them like old eyes watching with approval. And the fence was gone. So was the woman who had once begged to be seen. In her place stood Iris June Wilder, barefoot in spring, with a child in her arms and a man beside her who had never once asked her to be anyone else. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive when you ask for it. Doesn't shout or gallop or fall from the sky. Sometimes it walks beside you quietly, long before you even know you're ready. And if you're lucky, it stays.